Hi, my name's Phil and welcome to LabourVision, where we discuss Labour policies. And in this video, although there have been a few new policies discussed in the last week, by far and away the biggest one is the change of green investment planning. And I want to cover the main points fairly briefly, but then focus in on the policy on windfall taxes and how it's been framed. So the first thing to point out is I personally don't agree with the decision last week. I think it creates a number of unnecessary problems for Labour. It leaves them up to a couple of key accusations. First, that the party are not quite as serious about boosting the economy as they were. Public spending, which generates a return, is investment, not really spending. Reducing the amount invested reduces the return possible. It's that simple. Second, this was Labour's flagship policy, and if Labour are going to gut their main policy, it makes it look like they're not really committed to anything. Now, both of these points of view are, of course, subjective, and some may say, well, that's not quite fair, but this is how many people see the move as backed up in an opinion poll. Perception is important in politics. However, there are a couple of things which need to be considered on the flip side. The first is that Labour never had £28 billion a year worth of green investment planned. I think this surprises people because they think, well, they said 28 billion, so they must have planned to spend that. But Labour's plans come to something close to about 10 billion a year. The reason for the 28 billion was that it was deemed affordable when they announced the policy, and it would form a fund from which they could invest in any good ideas which arose at the time. They weren't planning on all of that spending several years in advance. So in scaling back the pledge, they haven't dropped a lot of existing spending plans. As far as I can tell, funding for home insulation has been scaled back, and I'm not really sure anything else has been mentioned. But we will see when more details emerge during the general election campaign. Other thing to point out is that the decision last week had nothing to do with the coming election. It will not affect the coming election at all. It's about the following election. It's been decided, rightly or wrongly, that Labour should not promise anything which they are not guaranteed to be able to deliver in power. Now, I don't agree with the logic entirely, but that is the position they're taking. However, I do also want to point out one aspect of the plans which has changed a little, but also shows how Labour are going to be able to invest despite last week's little stunt. Because there are people saying, oh, this just shows Labour just going to be like austerity light. No, they're not even remotely. Austerity is when you spend less. It is not when you spend more, but not as much as you once said you would. And people will ask how Labour will spend more if they're going to stick to Tory fiscal rules, which even the Tories aren't sticking to, and without raising taxes. Well, we could talk about not wasting money on Tory crony contracts, but in reality, that doesn't change the amount spent. It just means you spend it more wisely and get a better return. But the way Labour will spend more is by raising more money. Now, they won't raise the rate of any tax, as far as I can tell, or there's one, which I'm going to come on to, but they have talked a lot about closing loopholes. And one of the ways they're doing this, which is very much linked to the green investment, is by applying windfall taxes properly to oil and gas companies. Now, you could argue that this is a new tax in a way, because in theory, the Conservatives were eventually forced to apply windfall taxes, but they tended to apply them mostly to the producers of green energy, not oil companies. That being said, it's not really a new tax because there is a theoretical 75% windfall tax levy on oil companies, and Labour are just proposing that it goes up to 78%. But because oil companies don't in reality pay the 75% properly, they just say, oh no, we made all these losses. So it turns out we didn't make anything this year. These like richest companies on earth. They're panicking over the move. Not because of the extra 3%, I suspect, but because Labour are less likely to let them fiddle the other 75% as well. In a Financial Times article 2 days ago, it was reporting that although Labour are no longer planning to backdate the windfall taxes, that the oil industry was not happy they were going ahead at all. They claim it would wipe out 42,000 jobs and £26 billion worth of economic value. However, this is clearly untrue. Jobs and investment come as part of a business plan. Windfall taxes are called that because they are levied on windfall profits. That is, unexpected profits, not part of the business plan. So there are no extra taxes being proposed on the profits that the business plan's expected to make. It is a tax on free money which had nothing to do with their business model. In fact, Labour could tax them at 100%. And it still wouldn't hurt their business model. But as it happens, the plan is only to apply 78%. So the oil companies still get to keep a good chunk of profits, which came as a result of no work on their part, hence the term windfall. As for the no longer backdating the taxes, it might be that that would have been legally tricky to do anyway. Imagine you being told, oh, the income tax is going up. Oh, is it? Okay. And it's going to be backdated 5 years. It's like, okay, I'm going to have to pay for taxes from years ago? No. But in terms of how do Labour spend more than the Conservatives without breaking the borrowing rules, it is with devices such as this. The windfall tax plan is reckoned to raise about £11 billion over the next Parliament. Whenever the Tories try to attack Labour's plans to close tax loopholes, what they often try to do is downplay the amount raised. Oh, it's not raising very much, is it? It's like £1 billion. But the cumulative effect is significant. £1 billion from one source, a few billion from another, a couple of billion from another, and you add them all up. And remember that HMRC believe they lose out on about 200 billion a year due to fraud. And I mean rich guy fraud, I don't mean benefit fraud. And the potential to raise enough for decent spending plans is very much on the cards. And although Labour have formally scaled back their green investment spending by, a lot, those in favour of the plans, including, of course, Ed Miliband and a good chunk of the shadow cabinet as well, are still insisting that as the economy improves, they're going to keep pushing for the originally intended spending plans to be realised. The reason for the U-turn last week was this fear that they couldn't stick to it and guarantee that debt would fall as a share of GDP. So if the economy grows to the point where actually now you can spend it and debt is still falling as a share of GDP, we want the money, please. But there we are. Those are my thoughts on how the green plans seem to have changed. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.